There's a very specific moment that comes after you finally name something true. It isn't loud. It isn't emotional. It doesn't feel like anger, and it doesn't even feel like relief. It feels quiet in that. It feels like awareness. The kind that makes you look back at moments from your life and think, oh, that's what that was. That's where this episode begins. Not with blame, not with accusation, with recognition. If you've been listening to this series so far, you know the posture. We're not labeling people. We're examining systems. We're not telling anyone what to believe. We're looking at the evidence together. In the last episode, we talked about calibration, what it costs to live inside a body that's perceived as high risk. The constant monitoring, the restraint, the calculation. Today, we're going to talk about what happens next. What happens when survival behaviors are evaluated by systems that don't know how to read them? Let's slow this down. Calibration is not a personal trait. It's effort. It's the amount of work that a person has to do just to move safely through an environment. And this part matters. When people mistake calibration for personality, they erase the labor behind it. What looks like quiet isn't temperament, it's work. What looks like distance isn't disinterest, it's discipline. And work that goes unseen eventually goes unrewarded. If you're calibrated, you are not simply being quiet, you're calculating. You're running a background process at all times, reading the room, adjusting tone, managing perceptions, minimizing risk. That effort is real, but recognition systems don't measure effort. They measure appearance. Think of it like a computer running a massive background program. On the screen, everything looks still. The cursor blinking, nothing's moving. To an outside observer, it looks like idle timing, but beneath, the processor is running hot, scanning for threats, preventing crashes, managing loads, keeping the system stable. The machine isn't doing nothing. It's doing everything you don't see. That's calibration. Recognition systems, workplaces, leadership pipelines, performance reviews are built around very specific signals. Visibility, speed, projection, ease. The person who speaks first is seen as confident. The person who interrupts is seen as passionate. The person who takes up space is seen as leadership material. But confidence signals are not the same as competence. And restraint is not the same as disengagement. Yet those distinctions are rarely made. So when a calibrated person walks into a recognition system, something breaks. Restraint gets misread as passivity. Control gets misread as low engagement. Precision gets misread as hesitation, not because the person lacks ability, but because the system doesn't know how to read survival. This isn't a character problem, it's a literacy problem. The system was never taught how to read safety. So when it encounters discipline instead of dominance, it assumes absence instead of effort. This is a translation failure. You're speaking the language of safety. The system only understands the language of dominance. Here's what most people never see. Internally, the calibrated person is working harder than anyone else in the room. They are monitoring emotional temperatures, holding back reactions, anticipating outcomes before they happen. Their brain is doing more work, not less. But externally, that work is invisible. And invisible effort is rarely rewarded. Here's the paradox. When calibration works perfectly, nothing happens. No conflict, no disruptions, no incidences. And success, when nothing happens, looks exactly like invisibility. You succeeded by making sure nothing goes wrong, and then no one sees the work you did to prevent it. This is where the cost begins to show. Expectation without recognition turns into extraction. If a system expects your calm, your discipline, your reliability, but never acknowledges the effort required to produce it, it isn't benefiting from your strength. It's consuming. This misreading doesn't affect everyone equally. For Black men, restraint is often misread as lack of leadership presence. But the absence of restraint is misread as aggression. A narrow margin either way. For Black women, strength is often misread as limitless capabilities, a capacity, which leads to overassignments, over-reliance, and exhaustion. The reward for survival becomes more responsibility. For others shaped by high-risk environments, caution is mistaken for lack of ambition, even when it's actually deep situational intelligence. This is how talent disappears, not because it wasn't there, but because it didn't arrive loudly. Calibration produces skills organizations say they want: emotional intelligence, de-escalation awareness, precision under pressure. But when those skills don't look like bravado, they go unnoticed, and unrecognized skills eventually withdraw. Recognition doesn't require agreement, it requires accuracy. You don't have to like someone's silence to understand it as discipline. You don't have to reward every behavior to stop mislabeling it. Recognition is the moment someone finally says, I see the effort, I see the armor, I see what this costs you. Because people don't heal from what they're told to ignore. They heal from what is finally understood. And before we talk about fixing systems, before we talk about repair, before we talk about doing better, we have to see clearly. So here's the question I want to leave with you. Who around you might be wearing armor that you've mistaken for their personality? And what would change if you stop asking, what's wrong with them? And start asking, what environment taught them this was necessary?